is, about the nature. We are going to explore the sensitive nature of the AI in warfare domain on the formats that foster an open, frank discussion as a 60-minute roundtable discussion. But let's see how we can manage the time anyway. So I will not consuming so much time on that. So we are now having the online moderator Annie and also one of the organizer Beer with us today. So I will pass the floor to the Annie for introducing to the organizer. Just quick introduction.
First
of all, welcome everyone. It's
We can't hear you, Annie. Is there any technical issue?
yeah,
We can hear you.
you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you right now.
Amazing then. Yeah, so I was saying that it's an immense pleasure to have you all with us today, and I am Kuratul Ain Nisar. Feel free to call me, and I am a senior year law student as well as a governance and policy analyst at National. Um, I have with me the other organizers, Bea. We have and Abir Nisar also as our organizers. So I want to quickly thank them all for constant support and immense help for finding all the speakers and the experts on this topic. I'm very listen to your insights and have you on board the topic. Um, we all are aware that AI has reshaped our how we are living in this world, and warfare is no separate aspect from that. So I would love if we can quickly start the session because we have already. Apologies for that, but we have already a lot of time. Uh, so back to you, Bill, for introducing our very expert speakers and let's get started.
Thank you, Annie. And in this session, we are going to have three speaker, Miss Anosha from the civil society, and Yasmin Afina from the international intergovernmental organization, and also Miss Jamina Sophia, who are also joining on site here. So as an opening of this session, I would like to ask the speaker on about the on-site on the topic such as like AI in warfare, and so I will ask to the Yasmin, how do you see the future of the AI and also the warfare? Yasmin, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Hi, thank you everyone. It's nice to meet you. My name is Yasmin Afina from the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, or UNIDIR. Thank you so much for the organizers of this panel for inviting me today. And I'm so sorry for not joining you in Riyadh in person due to personal circumstances. I could not travel in time for the workshop. But so I know that you wanted me to speak a little bit about the future of AI in warfare, but if you would allow me, I might just share a few slides if I may. Is it correct? Is it okay? So let me just, yeah. I hope that you can see my screen. Perfect. So I know that you wanted me to speak about the role of AI in warfare and its role in upholding international law, specifically from a responsible AI perspective. But please allow me to twist the framing a little bit and instead look at international law as a key and central facet to responsible AI in the military domain. So in the first half of 2024, UNIDIR took part in regional consultations with states and experts in Asia Pacific, the Middle East and Central Asia, Africa, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And based on these consultations, we have identified and established a number of facets of responsible AI in the military domain based on what states have shared during these consultations. And one of them relates to compliance with national and international law, as you can see in the top right of the diagram. And in fact, the overwhelming majority of states across regions place compliance with international law as a central component of their governance approaches to AI in the military domain and wider security domains. And there is this shared sentiment that international law is an important framework that must be upheld throughout the life cycle of AI technologies meant for deployment and use in defense and security, and thus including in the context of warfare. So international considerations must be considered from the earliest stages, from the design, development, testing, and evaluation, which would require efforts to translate international law obligations into technical requirements in order to frame and shape the pre-deployment stages of these technologies in such way that they will somewhat be compliant by design. And I'll get back to it later in my concluding remarks. And so in addition, international law, and in particular international humanitarian law and international human rights law, must inform or even shape and frame procurement processes, as many states are increasingly considering purchasing AI-enabled capabilities. So it's not just for states that are developing AI, but also those that are purchasing. And so from a policy standpoint, however, it's also important to note that while this overall shared sentiment that international law is important, it does not mean that states approach it in a uniform way. And there are nuances across regions in states' approach to AI in the military domain, and the applicability of international law. So for example, states in Latin America and the Caribbean, they generally dedicate more attention and efforts to foster compliance with and uphold international human rights law. And this approach is somewhat reflective of the regional security landscape, where transnational efforts at combating organized crime prevail, and in the light of the international human rights law's applicability, both in and outside of conflict. And while, of course, states in all the regions acknowledge the importance of international human rights law, international humanitarian law tends to be overwhelmingly dominating the policies and discourse of states in other regions, although our findings were also such that the African region would also dedicate more attention to international human rights law, particularly within the framework of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And there's more of these findings in the report that I launched back in September, which I do invite you to download and read from UNIDIR's website by following the QR code on the slide or by going to unidir.org/kaleidoscope.ai. So now that we've established that states around the world see international law and compliance as an important component of responsible AI in the military domain, I wanted to add another layer to our discussions, the role of the multi-stakeholder community. And in fact, in the report that I previously mentioned, one of the other key areas of nuanced convergence that we have identified is the importance of multi-stakeholder engagement. And states, in fact, generally recognize the value of multi-stakeholder and cross-sectoral engagement to promote responsible AI in the military domain, but states generally disagree on how such engagement should be conducted. And so UNIDIR, in our capacity as an independent research within the UN ecosystem and with a mandate of informing member states, we've launched earlier this year in March a program of work called the Roundtable for AI Security and Ethics, or RAISE, in partnership with Microsoft. And we've been engaging very closely with a group of industry representatives, including big tech and startups, and consultancy organizations, civil society, and academics. And we basically asked them what are the main themes that should be prioritized in the context of AI governance and security and defense. And as a small parenthesis, I just wanted to know that as part of the RAISE program of work, UNIDIR will be holding the inaugural Global Conference on AI Security and Ethics on the 27th and 28th of March in Geneva. It's open to all. We'll soon be issuing a call for abstracts for you to present your insights to the international diplomatic community in Geneva in the UN. So please do mark your calendars and let me know if you'd like to be kept in the loop. So coming back to RAISE, the group has identified 6 themes that must be prioritized for the governance of AI in security and defense. And across all of the 6 themes, international came across as a recurrent pattern. So for example, the second priority theme was trust building. And one of the key recommendations put forward was that in order to enable this trust building, there's a need to clarify the interpretation of applicable laws. And so for this group, states should develop clear national positions on how to interpret and apply international law in the context of AI applications in the military domain, and thus ultimately contributing to build this trust between states. And another example is the third priority theme, which pertains to unpacking the human element in the development, testing, deployment, and use of AI systems in the military domain. And so clarifying how international law applies can help clarify then what is the level of human element that is required at each stage of the life cycle of the technologies of AI in the military domain, and under what basis in international law. So again, all of this can be found in a report that we've published on UNIDIR's website at unidir.org/governance-AI, or you can do so by scanning the QR code on the slide. And so finally, to conclude, I wanted to circle back to something that I mentioned earlier on how all of these initiatives basically can contribute to efforts towards compliance by design in the development, testing, and evaluation of AI technologies in the military domain, while also acknowledging and addressing and mitigating some of the risks that these technologies can present with regards to international law. So anecdotally, last month, I submitted my PhD manuscript specifically looking at how international humanitarian law considerations should frame the development, testing, and evaluation of AI technologies for military targeting. So anything that is going on before the deployment in the battlefield. And the thesis has been drafted with the assumption and acceptance, personally, not Unidir's side, that AI in the military domain is happening already, and without, of course, prejudice to possible instruments in the future that may prohibit and outlaw some applications. But at this stage, it's important to dedicate efforts and research towards ensuring that whatever technology will come out of the lab for warfare, they have been developed with compliance in mind instead of an afterthought. So earlier I mentioned the need to translate legal requirements into technical requirements. One example that I looked at my thesis is, for example, the use of proxy data for training and testing the use of AI technologies. And I argue that while proxy data can to a certain extent be necessary by virtue of the rule of precautions due to the messy and uncertain nature of warfare, it cannot be separated from direct indicators and instead should be seen as a natural part of the ecosystem of intelligence needed for military decision making. So all of this to say that with the right efforts, dedicated resources, and political will, compliance with international law should in principle be at the heart of the development of AI technologies for military domain. And this is not about coding international into algorithms, but rather identify and prioritize practical measures for the implementation of international law and ensuring that the deployment and use of AI in warfare upholds international law from the outset and does not jeopardize it instead by remaining as an afterthought. Because at some point you just lose the right to say oops. And on that note, thank you very much, and I look forward to our Q&A.
Thank you, Yasmin. And I would like to ask to the another speaker who are joining on site, how do you think of the international laws and the future of the AI in warfare? Could you also please give like an insight based on your experience as well?
Hello, thank you. Can you all hear me? Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you for the organizers for inviting me. I think I don't like to just circumscribe this conversation to warfare because these technologies are being used to attack civilians also during peacetime. So I like to call it the peace and security spectrum of things. And also because they're not only used by military actors, but also civilian actors, both state and non-state. So not state actors that are civilian, law enforcement or border controls. Whereas non-state actors, it depends from the context, as Yasmin very well pointed out. For example, in Latin America, where I'm from, organized crime is a big threat. In other regions, it's terrorism. In other regions, it's mercenaries. So all of these actors are using the same technology. So it's important to acknowledge the different implications and the different treatment under international law of each one of this. Because when we're talking about AI in the peace and security domains, we are talking about many different sets of rules, right? So we have obviously IHL, International Humanitarian Law. We have International Human Rights Law, which applies to, both wartime and peacetime. And also by civilian actors, and it also kind of involves state responsibility. So it also comes to public international law, which deals with this, but which also deals with Jus ad bellum, so that's the use of force, the right to use of force or self-defense type of considerations that can stem out of the use of these technologies. We also have international criminal law. We also have national, regional regulations and laws around different types of liability modes and compliance and procurement and all the different mechanisms that apply to the entire life chain of these technologies. So it is quite a broad spectrum to talk about the future of international law, because we're also seeing it as in the present. It's not just a future situation, especially right now when we're living in a world where international law is blatantly violated and with complete impunity, unfortunately. So we're living in a voluntarism world where compliance seems to be optional, and that's really not how it should be, because we're seeing very dire consequences for civilians in different types of contexts around the world. So. So what we need to do is everyone advocate, promote, and foster a coherent AI global governance framework. And I'm saying AI in general because by its dual use nature, we cannot really divide by civilian, by military, precisely because of the distinction that I made at the beginning. The convergence of actors, the convergence of moments of use and types of use, and etc. So we all really need to strive for this global AI governance framework to materialize, to be binding, and to have the correct mechanisms for implementation, because that will be crucial. And this obviously requires enforcement mechanisms, which, you know, it's going to be even harder, but we need to be ambitious because this is a very ambitious goal to preserve international peace and security at this time. So what we have in the current governance landscape, in this particular domains, we obviously have the GGEs, which is the group of governmental experts in Geneva, that are under the Convention of Conventional Weapons, which I think is a little bit ironic because these are the least conventional weapons, autonomous weapons. We also have REAIM, which is the Global Commission on the Responsible Use of AI in the Military Domain, where I'm a commissioner. We also have RAISE, as Yasmin mentioned, and we're now seeing the development of the transfer from the GGEs to the General Assembly, with resolutions that are coming out by the initiative of different states. For example, the Netherlands and Korea, Austria, you know, which are leading this conversation, amongst others, of course. So these are very welcome steps that we are building towards, but we still need to create a lot more awareness about the fact that these are situations that are going on right now. They're not future eventual possibilities, and we also need to be very mindful because there is a tendency to try to like separate either alleged pros of these technologies, like, okay, well, there will be more precise, there will be more accurate, like there will be less bias, but you know, we know that's why it needs to be all comprehensive within the same global governance framework for AI, because we all know the problems with AI itself, right? So the bias, the brittleness, the hallucinations, the misalignment, etc. So that those two cannot be dissociated when we're looking at what the actual consequences and effects of the use of these technologies in this space will be, and also the differentiation between offense and defense capabilities, it's completely illusory because the same technology is just interchangeably used. So any type of defense is an offense in itself. So that's something we should be mindful when we're having this conversation. And I will leave it there for now. And again, also looking forward for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jamina, Sophia, and it is very insightful to understand and the dynamics of the emerging technology and the challenges that we are facing. So I also would like to ask to the Inosha who are joining here online. From the civil society perspective, how do you see on AI and warfare, and what would be the how we could facilitate the collaboration and while making sure the respectful conversation among the a community. So no sure. Annie, are you going to share the screen or is there any PowerPoint? No? Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Miss Anusha, can you share your screen and have the slides on the screen, if that's possible?
Sure.
Thank you, thank you.
Does that work? Yes, okay. So thank you everyone for organizing this, and thank you for having me. It's such a privilege to be here and talk about such an important issue. I'm quickly going to go over some of the points, and the slides are just bullet points of my some of the issues that I would like to touch upon, so you can follow along. So thank you to the speakers for setting the stage for international collaboration. That is, of course, the first and foremost thing that we need to do. But let's also look at some of the very specific issues. So I am a technology lawyer by profession. I started my career in human rights, in international human rights law, working on treaties. And I was part of the team responsible for bringing the first 7 core human rights treaties to Pakistan. So we got the government to sign these treaties, and then we started working on them. So my association goes a long way, back when the SDGs were called MDGs. So, we've come a long way since then. And I'd like to touch upon some very specific legal issues. The aim is not to give you more anxiety about these issues, but, maybe help you form an opinion. Because, as civil society experts, as lawyers, as development professionals, your opinion matters as well, because this is a very new area. And as we go into the future, digital technologies become more and more decentralized, which means that governments have to rely on the civil society, the academia, and the development sector and the private sector, and not just technology companies, to be able to start forming these principles and guidelines moving forward. So let me just. So I'm going to touch upon AI and international humanitarian law, some of the very specific issues, and then I'll go into some of the ethical considerations as well. So when we talk about the key principles of international humanitarian law, they can be found in UN principles, the Geneva Conventions, the ICRC's handbook. If you're a person of faith, they could be part of your religion as well. And they just make common sense, right? So there's the principle of distinction, proportionality, and necessity. I want to talk about proportionality and necessity first, since we might be more familiar with that. So, specifically talking about Gaza, are the military responses towards civilian population proportional? Are they excessive? These are some of the things that we've already been talking about for the past year, so you might be more familiar with this. Do you think autonomous AI systems or weapons or autonomous drones or any other kind of robots, do you think they would be able to make these kind of proportional responses? So that is something to consider. As we have seen in the past 1 year, they've not been doing that. Then there's the principle of necessity. It obviously talks about whether this military response is necessary. When it comes to AI, there's been there've been calls to simulate certain situations first and then see and verify whether they warrant an actual military response. So these are like some of the principles that you might be familiar with. um, as far as distinction is concerned, there are laws available as well at the international level, perhaps not at the state level or domestic level, where states are supposed to distinguish between um, civilian and military targets or civilian or military figures or entities. And that has somehow translated into applying to AI targets as well. So, but do you think AI will be able to make that distinction? Let's hold that thought and we'll come back to that when we discuss ethical issues. So liability is, of course, a very important, issue that we've seen with autonomous weapons. If an AI shoots, somebody down, which was civilian target, perhaps it was a hospital or a school, who is going to bear responsibility for that? Will that be the person who was operating the AI? Will that be the AI itself? Will that be the commander of the person or the agent representing a certain team, or will that be an entire state? So command responsibility, there are rules around that, but they have to be applied in the context of AI. State responsibility, of course, it talks about that the state can be held responsible for the actions of its agents. I believe the principles are laid down under RCWA. Then there's developer liability. Somebody who developed an AI system that did not work and now it's being reviewed, it will go back to whether they followed all the protocols, they followed, government guidelines or international humanitarian guidelines, and whether they tested these systems and whether they, removed glitches and they made sure that all the laws were followed. And there's a recent, and for those more familiar with, how legal compliance works in highly regulated industries like nuclear power plants or, especially people, those working in the energy sector or in climate. Um, Trainers can also be held responsible if the training was, inadequate. So if you didn't document things properly, or if you did not impart adequate training, your trainers could be held responsible as well. So if somebody did not know how to use an AI system, their trainers could be held responsible for as well. And by responsible and accountable and liable, we also mean that it would include monetary compensation towards the victims and their families also. Now, there have been calls for, developing an international military AI tribunal in particular. Coming from Pakistan, we do not believe in military trials in principle, but just to, let you know that this is a form of accountability. But do we need additional forums when we already have international courts and when we have, these other international tribunals? How would they impact states individually? Would states have to sign treaties? Would they have to, incorporate them into their domestic laws? So these are some of the considerations. Then, of course, this is an area that I specialized in, so I really wanted to touch upon that as well. Of course, there are laws around the Outer Space Treaty as well, which mandate peaceful use of space and, sharing resources and, keeping things clean and debris free. But then there are, of course, issues with AI guided satellites. If there are issues, who is going to resolve them? Is it going to be the International Space Station? Is it going to be the United Nations? Is it going to be the state being affected, or is it going to be the state that actually, launched that AI satellite? And how do their actions, work? So oversight might be a bit of a questionable issue here. Then let's quickly touch upon ethical frameworks. So data bias and model drift are, the main concerns with AI models. Data bias is, of course, if you train your AI with biased data. For example, if you train it with skewed data, like or discriminatory, patterns, like kill all the dark looking people, or kill all the brown people, or kill anybody who doesn't look white or Caucasian. So these kind of like stereotypes, if AI picks up on these these elements, it can be very indiscriminate in the actions that these autonomous or AI based weapons take, especially during military action. So the data sets need to be, checked for bias. They need to be audited. There are bias, there are algorithmic checks as well that you can, fix those as well. But constant and regular oversight is very necessary. Then, of course, there's the issue of model drift. Model drift is when you keep, you overstuff and overfit your AI so much with data that it starts behaving unpredictably. So when people say, treat AI like a child or a person, and you keep feeding it information and training it, and one day it will start, making better decisions and wider decisions. Personally, I don't think that's quite accurate, because at the end of the day, it's still a machine. It's still, it's still something technical or technological. And if you look at, for example, the language of some of the AIs, the coding language, there could be, zeros and ones, which means they're very black and white. They're very exact and very specific. So overstuffing it with data can actually lead to unpredictable outcomes, where it just becomes so confusing that you don't know how it's going to act. And then who takes responsibility? Of course, that's the issue that we've been discussing. So audits and monitoring are important. Then, of course, there's the issue of privacy, especially in conflict zones. Surveillance is an issue. Surveillance of civilian population is an issue. Facial recognition software, is that allowed during a conflict, especially when you're trying to target civilians or pinpoint somebody's exact identity, or trying to, for example, we've seen in the Gaza conflict that very, very specific people individually have also been targeted, like doctors, journalists. So the privacy becomes very, very crucial in such scenarios. So of course we need like a solution for this, perhaps on the lines of the GDPR, as in Europe. But do we need another international regulation, or can we come up with like a general framework, or some specific standards that all countries that are perhaps part of the United Nations must follow, without having to, sign additional treaties, or pass additional laws within their countries? So this is another issue. Then, of course, autonomy versus human side is a concern as well. Human side or additional or added oversight is, of course, important when AI is being used in conflict zones. Um, I think one of the areas that we could be following for development around autonomous, robots or technologies is basically comes from the autonomous vehicle economy. So when we look at some of the laws that have been, some of the cases that have been going on around autonomous vehicles, those cases are going to help us determine some very, very minute details and very, very specific issues uh, particular to autonomous vehicles and robots. So they could apply to drones as well, for example, or other autonomous weapons that have been used in conflict zones. So again, human in the loop is another solution, where where you always make sure that there's human oversight present when an autonomous system is being used. And then, of course, you can create ethics committees as well, which will constantly monitor these developments. Corporate accountability is, of course, important. Just like, we require corporations to, submit transparency reports on how they're doing on climate change. We could ask the same from military, different militaries of different states to actually military suppliers or military contractors to who are part of the corporate world to submit these kind of transparency reports. And then, of course, if they lack training, if they didn't follow certain laws, or if they didn't follow certain standards, they could be held liable for those as well. There's, of course, a proposition to develop certain standards for military AI, which I think it's still a very, very nascent area. It's still developing, so it would be interesting to follow these developments. And at the end, I would like to touch upon generative AI as well. So we've seen a lot of, issues surface related to deep fakes and disinformation. Now, generative AI, again, we should be able to, use detection and prevention tools to spot it, especially on social media, for example, or especially for people operating AI-based weapons or AI systems within conflict zones. So developing these tools is very important to counter disinformation and deep fakes, because at the end of the day, our ultimate goal is to save human lives. I think this is all what we're here for. We're not here to, talk about how we're going to make profits or make money. The ultimate goal is to prevent civilian casualties, and, have this dignified regard for human life. So with that, I would like to end the presentation, and I'm open to questions. I look forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Inosha. You talk. Your presentation is very informative, like talking about the data bias and some model drift, privacy and data, autonomous versus human oversight, and also from the side of the corporate accountability as well as the use of the ethical use of the AI. It's very informative and insightful. I noted that we are we have to end this session very soon since we are running a bit late for this session due to the technical error. But before moving to the open floor session, I noted that Mr. Mohammed is here in the room with us, so I also would like to invite him to give any comment if he had.
Thank you very much, organizers and the kingdom for hosting this. Um, being from the ICRC and acknowledging that we are running late, I will just focus on to few things, and I will not duplicate what has been said by the other colleagues. AI and autonomous weapons should comply and respect the international humanitarian law, proportionality, distinction, and precaution. Can an AI-controlled autonomous weapon that has been tasked to execute an operation abort autonomously the operation if they see a child or a civilian or a fighter who is no longer capable of participating in the conflict? Because a soldier who was in a frontline operation, who was participating to the conflict, once they are injured and they are no longer part of the conflict, they are protected under international humanitarian law. So will these autonomous systems comply with those basic principles of international humanitarian law? Is a huge concern that we have. And therefore, we are actually in ICRC today, we have a specialist at the Silicon Valley. We have a delegation in China that are discussing with the technology companies that are contributing to the development of these systems. and having this kind of conversation. I absolutely agree with the notion of engaging with the tech companies and those who are developing these technologies from the design stage. That's quite key. We are also calling for a human oversight and control on any kind of weapons. A decision to kill, life and death decision, should not be made by a tool or by a logarithm. It has to be a decision that's at least the button or the final engagement or discharge of the munition should be, you know, controlled by a human being. That's quite important. And we are also convening, as some of my colleagues have already mentioned, and discussions and dialogue on how to incorporate and integrate the international humanitarian law in the development of autonomous weapons and artificial intelligence controlled warfare. And regulations are needed, but in the international humanitarian law applies, in any kind of warfare, whether it is carried out by a human or by autonomous weapon. And so that's very clear. Where we have to seek clarity is who assumes responsibility. Is it the developer? Is it the commander? As these questions were asked, and that has to be clarified. Therefore, we are convening discussions. Just last year or the end of 2022, there were 2 workshops in Geneva with experts discussing these kind of issues, and the recommendations and reports is out there in our website. Treaties that are binding, and that are aligned with international humanitarian law are actually necessary. And ethical, it was mentioned by one of the class, I don't remember. Ethics, dignity, and preservation of a human life is the ultimate goal, and that's what international humanitarian law is eventually about. Thank you very much.
You, Mr.
Thank you.
Mr. Mohammed. And for the next session, I would like to pass to our online moderator, Annie. Annie, the floor is here. Just a reminder that we only left like 9 minutes.
Oh, that's okay. Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mohammed Sheikh Ali. And I completely don't want to forget Mr. Neem's efforts in bringing Muhammad Ali on board with us. Thank you so much. So I love how this session is not only about identifying problems, but also about practical solutions and exploring how exactly AI can be used as a force of good. So I would really quickly want to, move our discussion towards our last policy question, because you guys have effectively answered all other policy questions in your presentations. So just quickly bringing the discussion towards it, can explainable AI technologies be effectively applied to autonomous weapon system to ensure human oversight and understanding of how targeting decisions are made? So I understand how there was compliance by design discussed, and also biases in AI systems discussed by Anusha and also Miss Yasmin. I would really appreciate if any of the speakers present on site or online would like to take this question up.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to have a first stab at it, and colleagues, please feel free to sort of complement. Just, from the top of my head, I think, first of all, thank you for the very interesting question. I think that it's very pertinent and something that in Geneva as well, diplomats are grappling with every day. I think based on what I've seen and what I've heard engaging with stakeholders, ranging from state representatives, but also civil society, industries, I think in terms of explainable AI, generally that's an issue that the AI community is trying to grapple with. But in the military domain, there's quite a few implications, especially with regards to in IHL, you have the legal duty to investigate alleged violations of international law. And then when you look at machine learning based systems where you have a black box, so you basically know what is the input, you know the output, but you don't know how it went from the input to the output. So for example, why the system specifically recommended to target this particular person, for example, then there is, there are issues, there may be issues as to like how the investigation, if this output led to a potential violation of international humanitarian law, how you could effectively conduct an investigation when the system has a black box. But at the same time, there are measures that is growing research efforts in trying to circumvent that problem. So you might, for example, have in the military domain, you also have to understand that when the commander authorizes the use of force, it's held to such a high level of standard, or supposed to be held to as high level of standard, then the commander will always maintain some level of responsibility over their decision, even when the commander decides to use and follow the recommendation of a weapon system or of an AI based decision support system, and even when the commander does not know how the system came up with the output. And then there are also sort of recommendations related to best practices with regards to documentation in the military domain. I think that's something that, even when not using AI, it's something that is increasingly being looked at. So there is growing research into that, but I don't think there is any silver bullet for this question, but there is research that is ongoing. But again, it depends on how much resources are being dedicated to that and how much political willingness is there to dedicate those resources.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Yasmin. And I would love if, the on-site speakers can also add their insights on this very question.
All I can add is, for now, until the technology is advanced enough, which, in our opinion, from the international humanitarian law perspective, we will never get there. And a human responsibility and accountability is necessary. So I think I lost. Yeah, we can leave the decision, killing, in the hands of technology. So I think there's a technical issue. But all I'm saying is a human control and oversight and accountability is ultimately necessary, even if the technology is so advanced. So that's our position at the moment. And there's an expert here.
Well, I agree entirely. So I believe that unless one can completely understand and control the entirety of the effects of a technology, one should not be using it, especially when human lives are at stake. And I also don't like the term laws, because it's not only lethal. So even other types of, physical harm, or to integrity, or to targeting for detention for other type of purposes, is also quite harmful, and should also be encompassed in the regulation of these technologies and their uses. And I would like to end with a quote of Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. She said this at the Arab Forum that was held in March in Beirut. And she said, there can be no sustainable development without peace. So that's something that we should keep in mind, because without peace, we really have nothing. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, the on-site speakers and as well as the online ones. I understand how we still have Miss Anusha left to answer this question, but we quickly need to wrap it up. I love how, in a very short time, we covered a lot of topics of accountability, global coordination and collaboration, and also the compliance and design part has got to be my favorite. So, guys, we have, have had some great key takeaways from this session, and I hope really that it further inspires more action and discussion because we really need it in this time. So, the report of this session would be shared right away, and I would quickly request all the speakers that are present on site to maybe come closer to the screen, so we can have a group photo together. Feel free to come, and we can pin Miss Yasmin and Miss Anusha on the screen, and how about have a quick group photo.
Nicotine, please pin beer, who are also our organizing member. Unfortunately, unfortunately, we have to end this session. It is a time set right now, so thank you, everyone. I know that you guys have comments and questions. Maybe you can approach to the speaker who are on site later. Sorry about that.
Phil, let's also pin Abir Nisar. She's also one of the organizers.
Could you please have the beer to pin on the screen? Thank you.